Hello, I'm Bob Pierce, and welcome back to the studio. This is part 2 of our discussion of illustrations. In the first part, we talked about doing paintings and drawings and your own artwork and the amazing amount of time it takes to do that. And we talked about a few other things, and in this particular video, we're going to talk about using props for photos to illustrate your book with photos. This is the route that I've taken in, well, since the very first couple of books. I find that it's way more flexible. It takes probably as much time, but in little groups that are a whole lot more manageable. And I think the rewards of these sorts of images like this one are just so much more worthwhile. Now this is the image. I showed it to you at the end of the previous video. This is what's going to end up on the back cover of Soldiers, Statesmen, Thieves, and Spies. It's a book that will be released early in 2021. And one of the main characters in the book is one James Butler Hickok, also known as Wild Bill Hickok. And to do this particular shoot, nothing was constructed for this. These are all found elements, or in some cases purchased elements, like the vintage style playing cards. And you can see the style of the lettering for the numbers and so forth is kind of old-fashioned looking, which for the period, you figure this was like 1870, somewhere in that vicinity, looks about right. Other than that, a pearl-handled revolver, a glass, a short tumbler glass you would find in a bar for hard liquor drinks. This one filled with watered-down apple juice and glass ice cubes. The glass, of course, won't melt in the hot lights of the studio. My grandfather's pocket watch and a yard of green felt that I bought at one of the fabric stores in the area here. Now, one of the things you have to bear in mind is, well, it's just one of the bonuses of being an author. Now, the distinction here is that you can't do this until you actually sell something. So when you transition from writer to author, and you're actually making some money at this, there is the opportunity to write stuff like these cards off. Yeah, there are some tax advantages, but I would strongly recommend, don't take my advice as your tax advisor. Talk to whoever does your taxes and find out what your specific situation is and whether or not you can actually do that. But it is one of the perks. Now, for the book Project 16, which came out a few years ago, one of the things that I wanted to illustrate was the library table where two of the characters, the Jamaican hacker girl and the octogenarian Russian scientist who was involved in building Project 16 in the first place, worked together to create a virus that could be uploaded to the Project 16 system and basically kill it. And so I wanted to set up something that looked like the scene that would be, what you would see in the library where they were working. So basically what I had to gather up together was I found an old monitor at a secondhand store, just the monitor, an old laptop computer that I just had kicking around. Somebody gave it to me some years ago. It sort of works, but it's like a million years old, so it's good for word processing if you really need it. A bunch of other odds and ends that I had accumulated. A mug. I love New York. Got that on a trip where we ended up in JFK Airport for hours and had nothing much more to do than shop. So I saw these in the gift shop and figured, well, I don't know. I don't love New York that much, but, for the few dollars that the mug cost, it might make a good prop someday. And voila. A lot of odds and ends of papers and so forth. Some of the built props that are in this include top secret files, various papers and folders full of Russian secret documents, things about Project 16 and how it was made, which of course it isn't because I have no clue. I made it all up anyway. And these really cool notebooks, which basically are just like an old notebook that I bought somewhere, created the insert and the insert for the spine, and the little handwritten note is just something I found online that you don't see handwritten Cyrillic very often, so I have no idea what it says. But it was on a site that had something to do with the missile program, so I figured even if it's not specifically relevant, it would kind of go with it if somebody actually did read it. And again, another notebook, and there's stacks of them in there. I just bought a whole bunch of secondhand junk notebooks at various places. Wherever I found notebooks that had clear plastic sleeves on them that I could slip something into, I grabbed them. The bagel, with a bite in it, of course, from the local deli, as well as the Red Bull can, and just a lot of creative clutter, basically, and then the lighting and everything else that went along with it. And we'll talk about that stuff later on. Now, one of the easiest things to do as far as making and building props is concerned is some sort of flat graphics. Just putting something together on the computer, having it printed out. I usually go to the UPS store in St. Albans, and they have a really high-end color printer copy machine that's got a RIP device, raster image processing device, inline from the computer. So the graphics that come out of it are just print quality. They're just beautiful. And all of this stuff that you see has been printed there, as a matter of fact, including these illustrations. Now, in a couple of my books, Jack Walsh is the main character, and in Hunting Lilith, he interviews Lilith and is working on writing this book, One Kill, One Shot, One Kill. And so we made up a number of covers, and it's really rather easy. I start out with a hardcover book, usually something I've picked up at a used bookstore or something like that, and create the dust jacket. And that is what is printed at the UPS store. I cut it down to size, trim it, fold it, put it on the book. We've got an illustration. So, a couple of Jack Walsh's books, and a bookmark from The Bard, which is supposedly a bookstore on Piccadilly Circus that appears in the book, in the Lilith book anyway, at the end, where Jack has finished writing the book and is doing his promotional tour and has a book signing event at this particular bookstore. And so a few props, all flat printed, assembled, and put together for the photographs to use as illustrations throughout the book. So again, for the book Project 16, I wanted to illustrate an abandoned Russian missile base. Supposedly something having to do with the Russian nuclear program. And how do you do that? I can't fly to Russia and try to find an abandoned missile base, and if I did, they probably wouldn't let me take pictures of it anyway. So how do we do that? Well, we make a sign. And the sign, along with a couple of others, is essentially the text of the famous Area 51 stay away or be shot on sight sign. You've probably seen it. Deadly force is authorized and all the rest of that. Well, I translated it in Google and made up these signs. It's basically just printed out on paper and glued onto a piece of foam core, and I put the bolts in it to make it look like it's bolted to the fence, and a paper clip bent up to hang it by. And then I went and found a rusty old fence and hung it on the fence, hung a couple of other signs over here on the fence, photographed that, and then found these satellite dishes behind a radio station and photographed those and put the image of the fence and the signs and everything over those and made the sign, added some rust and stuff in Photoshop to make it look old and rusty, and voila. This ended up being, I think it's on the back cover, and it's also in color, so it's a little narrower, but it's also in the opening spread of the title page in the book. Now, some of the other things that are pretty easy to make as flat graphics with a little bit of construction in the process, but also kind of fringing on forgery, so you need to be careful what you do and how you do it, are ID badges and passports. So for the ID badges, one for the FSB for Yuri and the little holder for it, and one for Megan Flynn, the CIA agent, and the holder, the neck chain holder that you see people wearing in the movies all the time. Sure. Well, anyway, the cards made up in a drawing program on the computer, the images of the various logos. Now, national logos are not copyrighted. They can't trademark them. So you can use them, but you can't impersonate them. So in other words, I can't walk into a store or a bar or something and say, CIA, let me in, get in the car, assume the position, whatever. Or if I ever get to Russia, whip this out and say, the same thing. No, you can't impersonate people, but you can use them as illustrations and then store them someplace where somebody probably can't find them. Likewise with passports. Now, I have my own passport, a real passport, of course, which I took the measurements of, and then found the covers of various others online. Apparently, there is a big international collectors bunch of people that like to collect out-of-date passports from all over the world. So they post pictures of the covers online, and if you want to bid on them or whatever, you can buy them, bid on them, whatever you like for your collection. So download the cover images, the JPEGs, and if they're reasonably sharp enough, create the cover so that it's a wraparound kind of thing. And I just basically take and sample the color of the front cover and make enough for the back cover, make it wrap around, cut it out, add some just blank paper in between, and put a round corner on some of them. Most of them come that way these days, and that's just a little tool we got from the scrapbook department at one of the local craft stores rather. And this particular one, Ulster, as it stands right now, Northern Ireland is not its own country and does not have its own passports, but in my books they're working on it. So we made up an Ulster passport, and you don't see it in this photograph, but in some of the other collage photos I have that posted as well. And some of the other easy things to make are postcards and coasters. I have a couple of bar scenes and collages where there are drinks and so forth with coasters from some of the locations that are mentioned in the book, which don't really exist. So you can make them up on the computer, make the coasters. It makes a great illustration. Top secret files, you saw some of those a minute ago, and an evidence bag with the just basically a Ziploc bag from my wife's collection of bags and foil and whatever all else in the pantry, with a paper insert that says evidence on it and looks like a form that you have to fill out and so forth, and then the garden claw with red paint on the tips of it that look like blood. put inside it. That was all very easy to make in a drawing program on the computer. I use a program called Freehand. Illustrator's another good one. There are other, CorelDRAW. Basically, what you need to end up doing is the finished file needs to be a PDF file that you take to the printer. In this case, the UPS store, but wherever else you might go, Kinko's or whatever, and give them the right kind of file to be able to print out. It doesn't really matter what kind of program you use to make that file, as long as that's what you end up giving them. Now, one of the more ambitious built props that I've made is this little police car. It's a small model. I bought it at I don't know, probably Walmart or someplace. It's just a little metal car. It's all painted up with the right black and white colors. Has a little light bar on the top and all of that. And the door's open. And what I did was I took this whole thing apart, painted the details in the interior and so forth so they'd be visible in the picture, put a light inside it, and added a couple of lights in a piece of black foam core stuck to the front, so that when it's parked like that, there's light shining out the front as if the headlights are on. And I took a bunch of pictures of it in low light, and then added the background to it, and then in Photoshop made all the lights on the roof and other things glow like they're all on in kind of a fog. And that took a fair amount of time. And actually, I took this whole thing apart and frankly wasn't sure I was going to be able to get it back together again afterwards. But I did. Finally sort of forced things in there. The danger was don't break the wires in the process. So that ended up in the book Brannigan. This is supposedly his police car in the day when the book is set. And it was kind of a fun little thing to do. And I love building stuff like this. And well, it didn't really cost much of anything. I think the little car cost like $5 or something. The little light bulbs, got them at the hobby shop. I think they were like 40 cents a piece or something like that. And a battery. And the rest, it's all Photoshop. Probably the most ambitious builds that I've done for a prop for a book is the time machine that appears on the back cover of Extant Eternal, where this young college girl accidentally transports herself with her professor's time machine back to 1865. And to prove that the time machine worked, she was going to try and thwart the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. This is basically two clear plastic photo frames, piece of clear tape across the back, some packing tape to create a hinge, and then the inside is full of junk computer parts, some of like this motherboard that I had. Laid it down in a color copy machine, made a few copies, cut up little sections of it to put different layers in there. And then from, some junk computer parts, the keypad, some switches and knobs and all of that. These readouts, those were made in that same graphics program and printed out and glued in place. And then the whole thing was photographed with lights inside. Essentially, they were these giveaway pens, promotional pens. They had somebody's logo on them, but the business end of the pen just broke that off because the other end had a little LED light in it. So I took a couple of those, put them inside so it would glow and light up like it's working. Gathered up whatever leftover parts I had, some extra switches, some odds and ends, some spools of wire, calculator, VU meter, whatever that thing is. And then photographed this in relatively low light. And then in Photoshop, I didn't really have to do much. The readout of the numbers on the screens there didn't come out because it was low light and there was a lot of backlight. They weren't really all that well readable, so I had to enhance them in Photoshop. But otherwise, that's pretty much just the way it was shot. right there in my basement, my little corner studio there. Now, I don't really have a photo studio in my basement. I have a little corner where I can set some stuff up. And basically, this is what it looks like when I do. And the camera is, well, it's a second-hand digital SLR. And I have a couple of lenses that work with it. A tripod to keep it steady. And then a couple of stands you see on either side with these bright lights on it. The key with the lights is that they are daylight spectrum lights. So you have the same sort of light that the sun would put on it. And a couple of fill lights that are small lamps on stands that help to fill in wherever there might be some dark shadows that you wanted to deal with. And the well, you don't see it in this picture, but I also keep a couple of pieces of white foam core handy to use as reflectors, which I can hang from the ceiling or wherever they need to be to reflect a little bit of light into the shadow areas. This is one of the shots for the Project 16 book. In it, you can see, you know, the notebooks that I created, one of the ID badges, the FSB ID badge, and a toy gun. And yeah, that's you know, these are useful. This one came from the dollar store, believe it or not. I think I paid, I don't know, $4 or $5 for it. It had a bright orange tip on it, which I think is necessary for toy guns so that the police don't think you're pointing a real gun at them or something and you don't get shot. But for props, it's legal to paint over that. If you're going to use it as a photo prop, that's very specifically outlined in the law. So I just want to point that out to you in case you're a little leery of doing that sort of thing. The gun that's in the picture was one that I bought online. It too is plastic, but it's licensed by, I think it's Walther. So it's a direct replica. It's intended to be used as a photo prop, although it did still come with a bright flame orange tip on the muzzle that was easy enough to paint over and use for the photos. So not a lot of gear necessary. I don't always use the SLR. I sometimes use that little Nikon pocket camera instead. If I can, I like to shoot outside. I like to use daylight. And the best sort of day is kind of a hazy, cloudy, overcast day where the light is really diffused and you don't have to worry too much about hard shadows and things. Living in the North Country, though, that doesn't always work, especially if you want to shoot something in the wintertime. It gets pretty, well, you just can't do it. I mean, let's just face it. I'm not going to go out in 30 below to shoot pictures in the snow. So having a way to set up indoors like this is really handy. So the takeaways for illustrations, photographic illustrations, using props for your illustrations. First of all, for any illustrations, you want to remember that these images need to reinforce your story. You're reinforcing the story with some sort of visual cues, but you're not telling the story with images. Usually I include, aside from the title page and things like that, which are by necessity the way I design my books, going to have some sort of a big image on, I might include 4 or 5 illustrations throughout the rest of the book, and some of them are recurring, as I use for my blank left-hand pages if I'm going to do right-hand starts for each chapter. Hunting and gathering props can be fun, even if you're just looking for some story inspirations, just picking stuff up that maybe will be useful someday. I find that to be I find it a lot of fun. I've got more stuff stashed in this studio that may someday be photographed, may not be, but it's a lot of times just you hold something in your hand and think, I just the backstory that thing must have, and then run with it. illustrations make your book an attractive package. Don't forget, in the end, I mean, your story can be as awesome as it is, but unless you put something together that gives somebody the sense of being a product of really good, of real worth and value, they're not going to buy it. So you need to keep that in mind as you start considering these various things for props and illustrations throughout the book. And also, too, we talked about the studio a second ago, different cameras that I use. It's a point that I made to my son when he first started taking pictures of race cars years ago. Yeah, years ago. Anyway, the idea being, it's not all about the gear. It's all about the eye. It's all about the composition of the picture. Photoshop these days gives us a second chance to fix things that don't come out right, or we can shoot things with the intention of shooting something that will be altered in Photoshop, and we'll do the picture accordingly. That's just, don't think like you got to run out and buy $1,000 worth of camera gear to be able to do this. You don't. If you've got a decent camera that takes high resolution pictures, and that little Nikon I showed you in the previous video, it shoots pretty high resolution pictures. And for a $100 camera, that's pretty amazing. And if you've already got one, you're all set. The lighting, that's another thing. I spent the bulbs, these daylight bulbs that I use, they're really, really bright. I'd show them to you, except that right now they're illuminating this video. They cost $8 a piece, and a little bit of something to reflect them behind. You can get an umbrella if you want, or you can just use a piece of foam core, white foam core. Get them at the drugstore even. I've seen them at the pharmacy. $1 or $2 for a sheet of foam core, and put it behind the bulbs, and it'll reflect the light on you, soften the lighting some, and you're good to go. Just the only thing you really want to make sure you've got is a tripod to hold the camera steady while you take the pictures. Usually you can find one for not a lot of money in a secondhand store, but there are expensive brands and cheaper brands. It doesn't really matter. We're not professionals. I happen to have a professional stand, but I also have a couple of cheaper ones that I picked up at yard sales and stuff that I use for holding up my lights and other odds and ends. I've got one in front of me right now that has a sticker still on it of $5, and it's a good sturdy aluminum tripod. So the stuff is out there. Don't go nuts, but do keep in mind that you want to make your book a really good-looking, valuable-looking product. So in other videos coming up, we're going to be talking about cover designs, photo models, the psychology of cover design. We talked about that in a previous video. If you missed that, go check it out. The power of eye contact using models for your covers and so forth, and how to go about doing all of that. So until next time, I'm Bob Pierce from the studio.